On your far left is Davy Carter from Cabot, House Speaker. Won election week after the general election in a fairly interesting set of developments, which he can choose to explain further if he'd like. And also Michael Lamoureux, who inherited the mantle of leadership in the Senate in a more traditional way. So I'll let these guys go. You guys pick whoever wants to go first, and then we'll ask questions. You've got an hour.
Got an hour, wow. Well, thanks everyone for coming. I appreciate the opportunity to visit and look forward to all of your wonderful questions. I know that everybody has. So don't have a lot to say by way of introduction and thoughts. I'm really interested in taking some of your questions and going from there. I'll tell you from up to this point, since I guess the Speaker's election in the House, let me back up. Let me talk a little bit about the membership. There are 40 new members in the House. Everyone, understandably, is getting in, learning the ropes, getting to know each other. We had a great week of orientation. See the members developing, a lot of relationships with each other, and frankly, that's what that was my number one suggestion to all of them, is to go out and do that and build the relationships. But it is really a good class of members. I'm very much looking forward to working with all of them and all the returning members. As all of you know, we have some big decisions to make, a lot of big issues in front of the state that will be long-lasting decisions, particularly regarding Medicaid. And that certainly is kind of the big elephant in the room, in pretty much every discussion so far about all other topics. That issue is going to drive, in my opinion, almost every other monetary issue, and it's just fundamentally the decisions that will be made there. There's a lot of people working on it. There's a lot of people who know a lot more about it than I do, and at least from my perspective, I'm doing a lot of listening on that right now. But I want to make clear that that is the primary focus of mine and a lot of others. So, Senator, that's some opening remarks there. So, to that, I'm excited about working with Senator Lamoureux. I'm not just saying this because he's sitting to my left and so close to me right now, but he's a brilliant guy. Yeah, I know all of you know him. If you don't know him well, you need to get to know him better. He's a brilliant guy. He's a great senator, and I am very, very happy and comforted to know that he's down in the Senate leading that chamber. So pass it over to you, Senator.
Thank you, Speaker Carter, and thank you guys for organizing this and letting us be here with you today. I pretty much agree with everything he said, and look forward to working with Speaker Carter and the House. And essentially, I have three goals, and one is to have a good working relationship with the House, and intend to spend a lot of time making sure we do that. And the second is to have a good working relationship with the governor, and then the third, which will take up most of my time, is making sure that the Senate is an effective body. And that's really my what I view my role is making sure that the Senate functions as it's supposed to. And if I spend my time doing that, making sure that we're working right, we'll be an easier partner for them to deal with. And so I'm just going to, rather than repeat everything he said, I'll stop there and take questions.
I guess kind of starting out, Mr. Speaker, you talked about Medicaid driving up every other monetary issue. Both of you all talked about Medicaid expansion, the possibility of compromise or a deal on that. Kind of update us, where are you guys at this point, and in terms of discussions on it, what's off the table and what's on the table in terms of Medicaid expansion?
From I guess what we know today, is we've got the federal government's told us it's all or none. And whether that is, in my opinion, you kind of have to take that for what it is. That that's for what they said, and then that's where we are. I think ideally, us sitting here and a lot of the membership wishes that wasn't the case, and maybe there's still some hope out there that that we would have some flexibility to tailor a program that's good for Arkansas. Where we are today, I left a meeting an hour ago with with some other members of the General Assembly, and there is a tremendous amount of effort going into obtaining and understanding all of the mountains of data that goes into the decisions about about Medicaid and Medicaid expansion. So I look at it. We've got two tracks. We've got track A with the existing beneficiaries that are on the rolls, and we're running in the red, and that's its own set of issues. And then we have track B, where we're talking about adding an estimated 250,000 with a new set of rules. And then you take it and you couple it and you lay them over the top of each other and see where you go and see what the numbers look like from that perspective. And then overreaching all of that, we have which is the issue of the hospitals. I think that's a real issue. The rural hospitals with the situation that they're in on Medicaid reimbursement. So to bring that all back together, I think where it's at least from my perspective, is still gathering the information, still trying to analyze it, and still trying to determine what's best for Arkansas going forward. I'm not one that has bought. We can take a deep breath. We don't have to do this tomorrow or next week. There's no deadline on expansion, and don't infer that I'm saying that decision is not going to be made. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying there's no rush. We have to do this tomorrow, and the long-term effects of what comes out of what decision's made, whenever that decision is made. It is so gravely important to the state, that we've got to be comfortable in analyzing and knowing what we're dealing with. So, I hope that answered your question, but that's where I'm at.
The same question. I agree with everything he said, and I would just hope that as the session moves forward, hopefully we'll get more clarity from the federal government about what our options are. I felt like the entire time that if we had the flexibility to come up with what I would call an Arkansas agreement, members of the legislature from both parties, that we could come up with something that both sides could live with. With the all or nothing approach the federal government is trying to force on us, I think that makes that task more difficult. Essentially, there's the scope of the expansion is been limited to all or nothing, and that makes it very hard to have an agreement. But and so I think we're just going to proceed. Every time I have a meeting on it with a outside group, I feel like I learned something new, and I feel like I learned something that I should have heard 6 months ago. So I don't feel any rush either, as Speaker Carter said. I think we need to take our time, make sure we get this right. For every member, I think it's the most important issue. I had breakfast this week or last week with the incoming Democratic members of the Senate, and we spent half of our time talking about this. So whether you're on the health committee or not, this is what people are talking about, and like he said, it's going to have an impact on what our tax policy is, what our budget priorities are for the state, and really everything else we do.
Have you identified any other cuts that could be used to replace the cuts proposed by the administration?
I'll take that right off. I don't think that's the starting point. Let's just take a step back and see where we are with the state monetary position. There are good things going on in Arkansas. We're getting ready to have another surplus, $300+ million. The governor and his team has always been very conservative on the forecast, and even within that conservative forecast, you know, and I'm rounding up, but, you know, in big numbers, you know, we're 350, 400 million, you know, forecast over the next 2 years. So you combine that, I mean, there's $700 million, you know, there. I mean, there are, you know, so we often forget about that. I mean, we're particularly when you compare where we are fiscally to other states, we're in a good spot. So I don't think the starting point is cutting necessarily. I mean, there's $700 million, you know, coming in. Now, when we talk about, you know, we get in the tax policy debate, and you know, if we're going to, you know, take a, you know, if we're going to, you know, debate, you know, giving some money back, you know, to the taxpayers, you know, I think you couple all that in, and that's the way I'm viewing this, you know, where we are today. There's, you know, we're in a good spot. I mean, the fact that we're talking about cutting taxes again in today's world, and with all the things that have gone on the last 5 years, you know, everybody in this room ought to be proud of that. I'm proud of it. I mean, that's a big deal. So, you know, that's my starting point.
You mentioned cuts. I mean, I look at our state budget and I start not necessarily with the governor's proposal, but with where our budget was last time. And I think we'll have to hear some arguments about why any of the proposed increases should be considered. And so, you know, that's one potential area, is just starting from the fact that we, you know, may not be able to increase other areas. And then he mentioned the surplus. I think that will be useful to help us, you know, after we determine which approach we're going to take. If the approach ends up being not dealing with expansion and just trying to make the system we have work now, I mean, the thing I've tried to be clear about is that we're not going to be throwing old people out of nursing homes. I mean, I haven't heard one member that thinks that's what we're going to do, and so I don't think that's not going to happen. And we'll find a way to do that, whether that's, you know, no growth for other agencies, or whether that means cutting into other agencies. We don't know that yet, but we'll do whatever it takes to make sure that doesn't happen.
Agree.
You guys had a large number of folks in your own parties who got elected opposing the Medicaid expansion. How are you going to go back and sell Medicaid expansion on these folks?
I'm not sold on it yet, so I mean, I want to be clear. I mean, so if you get to that point, I mean, it's a difficult issue. I mean, I look at it, you know, it's Congress has passed it, Supreme Court's upheld it, but this one issue, and Mitt Romney got beat, right? So I mean, we've got to deal with I wouldn't have dealt this set of circumstances, you know, if I were, you know, waving a wand, but that's what we have. But once we go through the things and the process, you know, that referred to with Andrew's question, and see if there's some consensus out there, you know, I mean, whether that happens or not, I don't know. But nobody has ever said, or I've never said that this was, you know, this was going to be some cakewalk either way. And, you know, there are a lot of strong opinions on both sides of the issue. And, you know, we're just going to have to analyze it, make recommendations, see what's, you know, we think's best for the state, and others will do the same. And we're going to have to debate it and let it go through the process.
Mike, I felt like, again, back to why the all or nothing approach is so difficult, there are underlying conservative reforms that a lot of the members would like to see implemented. And I felt like there was a trade-off, hopefully, that the more expansion or the more of those reforms they could implement, that would sort of offset, you know, different scope of the expansion. And so, you know, hopefully they could meet in the middle somewhere where there's some degree of expansion that covered the people that, you know, maybe the Democrat members want to see covered, maybe the bottom half of the total eligible pool, and couple that with the conservative reforms that others wanted. When you say, well, it's all or nothing, you really take away that ability to have that negotiation. And so I think in one sense we have to negotiate as if we had the authority to implement an agreement, and hope that that ends up being true, even if at the end of the day we're not able to do that, if that makes any sense.
What type of conservative reforms?
There's a wide variety of things that have been mentioned. Scaling back on some of the services that are provided, possible drug testing to refer people for treatment, possible co-pays, not to deny care, but to direct care in a more efficient way. In other words, if you're coming to the emergency room for something you should go to a local clinic for, maybe there would be a co-pay. There's a lot of different options out there, but right now that conversation is sort of being stifled with a concept that nothing can be done. But I hope that we were able to sort of let the people who are working the most on that, which is the Public Health Committee members, have that debate, and hope something changes at the federal level between now and the time we make that final decision.
The governor says that it would save taxpayer money to resolve the question during the session and not have a special session. Are you concerned at all about the cost of having a special session?
Well, yeah, always. But the cost of Medicaid, the billions of dollars we spend on that would, in my mind, trump the being down here for a few weeks if we need to be down here. So, it's always cheaper for us to go home. It's not cheaper for us to waste billions of dollars in an effort to not be here. So that that's not. There's a lot of reasons to do it during the session, but the cost of a special session is not one of the top reasons to me.
Do you think you can get done in the regular session?
I mean, I think if we had the freedom to negotiate, we could. I mean, that's what we don't have right now. And so I think if every week some rule changes or there's some new policy at the federal level, and so I think if we had all the facts and we had the freedom to negotiate, I do think we could. And I haven't heard anybody say they hope we do it in a special session. That's not, nobody's saying that, but it's an option that we may have to have if we can't resolve it.
What facts do you feel like you still don't have a grasp of, referring to?
Well, for one thing, the full, whether or not the federal subsidy, if we went with the federal exchange, I mean, first of all, we haven't decided that yet. That's a public policy issue. We're going to have a state exchange, a state-federal partnership, or a federal exchange. And I don't think we yet know if some of the things, some of the benefits that the Affordable Care Act offered through a state exchange, it's unclear if those same benefits are offered through the other exchanges. It's my understanding those rules have not been even issued yet by the agency. So a lot of things like that. There was one presentation I heard that said of the people who are eligible for expansion, if they're able to receive the full federal subsidy, they could get private health insurance for $29 a month. If that's true, I don't know it is, I'm not saying it is, but if that's true, the reimbursement rate that would give the people we're talking about covering private insurance for a very low monthly fee. It would give a higher reimbursement rate to the hospitals. And so you could put a smaller number of people on there and net a higher overall amount of revenue to the healthcare providers. That's that either is true or is not true, but we need to know that before we make these decisions. Nobody knows that right now. And there's probably another dozen things like that we don't know.
Senator Lamoureux, you talked about the importance of drug testing. Certainly I know at our organization you don't walk in the front door, you don't start the first day until you've had that drug testing. Would it be a good idea to have drug testing for state employees?
I really don't know. I mean, I don't know what our policy is on that right now, but that's it. It may be a good idea. It's not something I'm proposing.
Can I get Speaker Carter's response to my question too about what facts do you feel like you don't have a grasp of?
Roby, I'm beyond. In addition to kind of what Michael said, I am focused pretty much solely on the math, and like he mentioned earlier, we have conversations with people that are vested in the situation, and I don't mean that vested in a bad word, or knowledgeable about the situation, that still, when you sit down in a private room, that acknowledge there's really just a lot of uncertainty. I mean, I'm asking questions, long term. What's going to happen long term? What happens long term if we do it? I heard the stat that that with Medicaid reimbursement today, the average pay is about 82 cents on the dollar. It's under cost, and I made the comment: well, do you make that up on volume? Or how does this work? How are we going to make this work long term? What happens if we don't do this? What happens? Do you believe? I'm not asking you. My question: will the hospitals really close? Well, yes. What happens? Well, then they go here and they go here. But this is it's just to not acknowledge that this is a complex issue. I think is a little disingenuous. I'm not saying that anybody's done that, but I mean it is a complex issue that long-term effects. I'm not convinced that. I mean, there's probably not. We will never know, right? The right thing. But we just keep talking to these people that are in the know, that are in the business. But how long-term financially does the state continue to pay? And even when we're on the 100%, we talk about what we know now. So we've got a 100% reimbursement rate. Well, that's going to change, right? So 10% of a big number is still $1. I mean, we still have to pay that. And if you quick math in your head, if that number goes to 1.1 million people in the state, and we're still spending $5,900, $6,000 a person, now we're spending more, Medicaid than the entire general revenue budget. How do we continue to maintain that? And as I struggle with having how to say that, I'm pretty sure the federal government can't afford to do this, but I'm not, we're state legislators, right? So, to separate that belief, and I'm not speaking for Senator Lamoureux. I don't know if that he thinks that or not, but I don't think we can. But then all right, to acknowledge, all right, I'm not there. I can't control that. So now, what's best for the state? Well, let's just look at the math. We're gonna add, there's conflicting opinions on that as well. I mean, we're talking about pro formas. Inherently, those are projections, and they're not known numbers. But add 10% of that number on already the escalating cost. I mean, those are real dollars that Arkansas taxpayers are going to have to pay. Those are real dollars that future legislators have to come up and and budget. And when they're looking at the whole big picture. So I'm focused on the math, and I don't have we're getting there, and it may not ever be 100% comfortable with it, but it's such a long-term important decision. I just want to do my due diligence, and it's all about the money, right? I mean, there's your quote. It's all about the money, and it is. And so that's the way I look at it.
I spend a lot of time with Republican members that point out their concerns and possible, flaws in expansion, and then I spend a lot of time with Democratic members talking about all the possible benefits and what they hope it does. I don't think the two groups have, we're not in session yet. The two groups haven't spent a lot of time explaining that to each other, and that's what I'm increasingly doing. Just saying, hey, if you think you're so right about this, why don't you sit down with the Public Health Committee and explain your side? I feel like once we start doing that, and everybody has other jobs and kids' basketball games, all kinds of other things they're doing. But once we're here doing that, I think that can kind of move things along a little bit better than what we're doing right now. Kind of just everybody, saying what they think about it without really listening to the other side.
And if I can kind of follow up to this, I'm going to give me a little leeway. When I think a little bit has been lost in this Medicaid conversation when we talk about a potential 1.1, 1.2 Arkansans being on the system. It's over what's that, 35% of the total population. I mean, if you, let's y'all check my math. I mean, 30 plus percent. I mean, I think we all realize that that's not an ideal position to be in, with per capita income and the well-being of our citizens. Okay, and so when you and now you're talking about all these other things, you know, education and you know, industry coming to the state, and then you talk about allocating capital from a tax policy standpoint and a budget standpoint at the state level. I mean, even the goal would be to have that number, not because with policymakers you don't want to have the coverage, and I mean that's not the issue. You know, the issue, the goal shouldn't be to grow that number in coverage, you know, that qualifies. The goal ought to be to reduce that number and reduce it by increasing, you know, the per capita income and the well-being of the citizens of Arkansas. And do I have any, no follow-up, but how do you do that? Those are, it's well beyond the conversation, the time we have today, but, you know, it's back to allocating money to K-12 and higher ed and, you know, and bringing industry and jobs to the state and tax policy. I mean, you can't look at that in a vacuum. So, you know, I just think we, you know, put this whole thing in perspective, you know, addressing this, the Medicaid expansion issue. I mean, you know, that ought to, you know, start triggering other thoughts about how we're looking at this. And I'm sorry to get off on a tangent there, but you know, it's you know, felt compelled to say that. And I don't know. Sorry about that.
No.
I'm rambling now. Told Gabe this morning I was in a rambling mood. He said, "Oh, watch out, it's not good." So.
Is there any way to address, you know, Medicaid shortfall totally independent of expansion? It just kind of seems like the narrative from the governor's office that, you know, we can solve this if we expand. You talked about track A, track B. Do you see like the session developing where there's a period of time where we only deal with the shortfall completely independent of expansion? And kind of how does that maybe look? You know?
The short answer is yes, and that's what we do every session. I mean, if expansion wasn't out here, we'd still have a problem, and we'd still be talking with you right now about how to fix it. So, and that's something that's happened for a long time. So, he's told us what the problem is, and he's told us his preferred method of fixing it. If the legislature doesn't get there, then they'll do what they always do and look for another way to resolve it.
And on the same kind of follow-up, you talked about some of the conservative, you know, options that have been out there. Are those? You said there's really not any room for debate right now because you know, expansion is strict from the feds. Can that debate only happen on expansion, or can you talk about these conservative things just dealing with the shortfall?
You can do it, but there's really no incentive for the other side to do it. I thought the give and take sort of presented a unique opportunity to do it. If you just come in and say, we're going to add some of the components that I mentioned, and I'm not the best spokesman for those ideas, but the people that have those ideas, if those are presented just to our current system, it's kind of a one-sided argument. And so I'm sure that if we do that, some people still present those ideas, and there's some very good ones, but it's not the same as there being a strong need from both sides to get somewhere, and both people giving up something they otherwise might not to get to a common goal. I just thought there was a unique opportunity to do both at the same time. But your question is, can you still do that? And the answer is yes, you could still do that. It's just harder.
So what's the odds of the legislature approving expansion?
I have no idea how to answer that. I don't know.
I'd say lower than they were before with an all or nothing approach from the federal government. But if those handcuffs are removed, then I'd say, I don't know a number then, but it's a lot better chance if we have the ability to negotiate among ourselves.
So you guys don't gamble?
Never.
Haven't bought my first lottery ticket yet.
What about on the issue of tax cuts? Kind of the same way with Medicaid, can you kind of lay out what all is on the table in terms of options for tax cuts? And with Medicaid driving everything, is there realistically a chance of any tax cuts getting through?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think I don't think it's off the table. The amount is, the first step is always to determine what can reasonably be cut. And I think that there's still room to have that that debate. Again, it does. I mean, yes, it makes it harder if we're having to take the steps, mentioned earlier to address the Medicaid issue. And then you can start. You can be creative in different ways. I mean, the governor's got his, trigger out on his and his proposal, and that. From my perspective, I think it's not off the table.
Yeah, I don't think it's off the table. I mean, I don't want to speak for the House, but I think there's a lot of members of the House that have focused on at least making themselves knowledgeable on some type of income tax reform. And then I know that it tends to break down where the members of the Senate committee have looked more at some what I call pro-job or pro-growth type tax cuts. And so I think you'll see, kind of like the last session, I think you'll see at some point us decide what's the appropriate number to cut, and then begin the negotiation among the House committee, the governor, the Senate committee about, okay, if this is the number, how would that number be allocated?
What are some examples of pro-growth tax cuts?
I mean, I've heard, there's several proposals out there. I think the state chamber has a laundry list, as they usually do. But I mean, cutting the sales tax on energy has been mentioned. Reducing the sales tax on energy for manufacturing, that is. Reducing the sales tax on replacement parts for factories, things like that. I mean, we had a business give us an example recently of building a factory in another state because the sales tax difference would have been $6 million more if they'd built the factory in Arkansas. Those are the kind of things I think we'll hear a lot about, in the committees when we start the session.
The recent budget, the revenue forecasts changed this discussion at all? Just the recent revenue reports and the kind of rosier picture, has it changed the discussion about taxes at all?
Tell me, this one that just came out here, that's, I'm, no. I mean, again, that goes back to what I said earlier. There's some good things going on in Arkansas. I mean, if we're in a good spot. Especially when we look at other states in the union and to have the I mean, again, the fact that we're talking about no cuts versus maybe no growth and tax cuts in today's environment, in today's world, is we ought to be proud of that. And I think that's just further evidence that that there's good things going on in Arkansas. I mean, and so it hadn't changed, but it didn't surprise me. But it's all good news.
That's pretty much what
You said Medicaid was the big issue, and then but that there was no timetable to address the issue. You take your time and negotiate and all that. But then when you're talking about tax cuts, you say, well, it depends on the Medicaid issue. Everything depends on the Medicaid issue. So basically, until you get the Medicaid issue resolved, nothing will happen. You won't get anything done before you get that done.
I think you have to resolve I think you move forward with debating all of the ideas, but I think we have to resolve the expansion issue before we know what our budget looks like. And if we, depending on which path you take on expansion, then it creates a whole other series of options. If you go with expansion, there's going to be a whole set of consequences for that we begin debating. If you decide to defer that, then it's kind of back to the more traditional approach of making what we have work.
You mean you can't decide on tax cuts until you decide on Medicaid expansion?
You could. I think
which you might defer to a special session. You might defer the entire budget.
No, I don't think no. We have to decide at some point during the session what we're going to do about expansion. I think one of those options is deferring it. If we defer it, we're essentially saying we're not doing that right now, and then we have to get a budget based on those facts.
To circle back to something Mr. Are you suggesting that the Medicaid shortfall that the state has projected could be cured, and you favor it doing it through surplus money?
Ask me that again. I'm sorry. I can't see your mouth there. I can't. I'm hard of hearing a little bit. All right,
You talked about the surplus money we had.
Right.
We were talking about, I think Sarah asked about the cuts.
Right.
Are you suggesting that all the Medicaid cuts that the BD administration has proposed could be forestalled by using surplus money, and you favor that?
And in combination with the projected growth in revenue, yes.
How much of the surplus do you think could be used?
I mean, he's used. We're down to 138 million. Is that Duncan nodding his head? So, you take that and there. I have not sat down with the governor yet in detail on his suggestions and proposals for use of all the surplus money. So I would reserve, kind of getting into that. I mean, I think I need to have that conversation with him. I don't know if you have or not, but I haven't. So not in any detail. We talk generally, but I would need to circle back up and see if there's something else out there that, he would see that would make a recommendation that was more important than the other. I mean, now we're into prioritization. So, I'd have to reserve answering that till later.
So your answer is yes, or you don't know?
On Andrew's question?
My question.
I know. I said with surplus in combination with growth funds. Your answer was yes. I think he was understood you correctly. He was asking specifically about all of the $300 million of surplus money.
Yeah, because the governor's already proposed using some of the surplus money for Medicaid,
right?
And still there's the shortfall that he's proposed these cuts for. Are you saying that you think there should be more of the surplus than what he's proposed?
Perhaps.
To fill that shortfall?
I'd say the surplus, the remaining surplus, combination. There's a combination out there that'll have to work. It'll have to be either with growth money or with the remaining portion of surplus. So that. But the point is, at least from my perspective, that we're going to fund the Medicaid shortfall one way or the other. Is that fair?
I think it's very fair.
I guess
with surplus money and growth money? Or
Yes.
And not cuts?
Yes.
Or combination thereof.
So you're saying none of the cuts that have been proposed.
The level 3 cuts.
All of the cuts that because it goes beyond nursing homes. All the cuts that are proposed to fill the Medicaid shortfall. Are you saying that none of those are going to happen under your watch and your watch?
My personal opinion is no. The cuts to Medicaid are not going to happen. Now we're going to have. That's what we're here for. We're going to have that debate. But I do not think there'll be any cuts to Medicaid.
I don't either. I mean, I'm willing to listen, but my point is that we're prepared, or I'm prepared to use to suggest using the surplus money and a combination of that with the growth money to not to fund any or to avoid any of the cuts.
Have you had any discussions with BD about that?
I have not.
Are you talking just about the governor's proposed cuts? I thought you all might have some efficiencies you would find in existing Medicaid that you'd be trying to work on in this session.
I'm sure that will be presented, but I think answering their question, I think we were talking about the governor's proposed cuts.
Right.
You would simply put, you'd rather use surplus money than do those cuts?
Yes.
Yes.
Can you explain a little bit more why you don't think those should be cut, those nursing home, I think it's a dental insurance program or something?
Why we don't think the level 3 nursing homes should be cut? Well, I mean that's a no-brainer. I mean, we're not doing that. I mean, I don't know how to. I mean, that's we're if we we're going to fund, those needs, and the most, that's a category of Arkansans that are in the most need, and we're not going to cut that. And there's, as Michael said earlier, I haven't heard one member say that they wanted to do that. So, that's just, it's just not going to happen.
It'd probably also be more expensive. I mean, some of the people, if you take them out of the nursing home and put them wherever it is somebody would be proposing to put them, that doesn't cure the problem. They're going to have additional health problems. They're going to be in the emergency room. They're going to be back somewhere, and we're going to be paying for that as well. So I'm not even sure it's a cut that saves any money. But like we keep saying, no member of the legislature thinks we're going to do that. So I don't think that deserves a lot of our time. That's just not going to happen on the level 3 nursing home cuts.
Speaker, you said you're not sold on Medicaid expansion, but if you guys are able to, use surplus money or whatnot to avoid cuts and take care of the shortfall, does that kind of take away any momentum for folks to support expansion you maybe are already opposed to? If you solve your shortfall problem, why do you
I think expansion is the proponents of expansion aren't just proposing it because they believe it solves our current Medicaid shortfall. I mean, I think that's one of the benefits that they list, but I don't think that's the only benefit. So it's still a separate debate, I think. Even if if that's the only reason for expansion, then I think that would not be a very strong argument. I think they have other arguments that they would advance that they would think would be stronger than that.
With the idea of using the surplus to fill that shortfall gap, I guess, what proposal do you have going forward in the long term to fill that gap instead of just using surplus year after year?
Well, that's why I think it has to be a combination of that and looking at other. We may not always have the surplus, and I think we have to make a long-term or medium-term view of this problem and not just look at the next 2 years, which means we may not be able to increase other state agencies, even if the surplus money is currently there. Just because we have whatever the number is doesn't mean we're going to spend every penny of it. We're going to have to be very conservative with every state agency, realizing that we may need to continue to build up a surplus to keep doing this over and over again until there's, some other resolution.
If Medicaid is not expanded, what happens to people who are still required by insurance under the Affordable Care Act but are not eligible for subsidies?
I don't know. I mean, I don't even know the facts on what that population is. That's one of the. I mean, again, that's back to one of the hundreds of questions that are unresolved that we'll be working on during the session. But I don't have an answer to that.
But isn't it true that if Medicaid isn't expanded, some of our working poor people would be the only ones without access to health insurance?
Yes, and that.
The health exchanges would kick in at some level of subsidy. The mandate would apply, but then this group that you would be denying would be the one group in our society that didn't have it. Is that right?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, we've heard of presentations that say that group could be eligible for full federal subsidy and possibly buy health insurance with a premium as low as $29 a month. If that's true, as we're told it was true.
All their costs would be paid federally, just like Medicaid.
All their costs would be paid. The subsidy would cover the premium, with the exception of $29 a month. That number is debatable, but that's what we've heard at one level. Again, that even if you're the most ardent proponent of Medicaid expansion, I think you have a duty to find out before you put that person on Medicaid. Is it true that they might also be eligible under this act for private health insurance at $29 a month? If that fact is true, it's better for the state, it's better for the person, and it's better for the health care providers to put that person on private insurance and get a higher reimbursement rate.
I've heard of something like that to find out.
You wouldn't think it'd be that hard, but I've been trying to find out for quite a while now, and successfully. So it kind of depends on who you talk to. But in meetings with people who are supposed to know those things, they tell us that they think that if we take the federal exchange route, that's a strong possibility. I don't know.
John, I think the group of people you're talking about, pending some of the information coming in. I mean, you're right that's the group that's, I don't know with the right word. I mean, that's the most vulnerable group that that we would have that would to try to determine what's the best course. I mean, there's no doubt about that.
Real quick question on an unrelated topic. Recent Supreme Court decision on school funding. Is there any way, you know what I'm talking about, is there a way forward y'all see on that, any changes on that?
I'm still listening on that. I mean, I guess y'all would know. I mean, the court hasn't granted the rehearing, right? They haven't ruled either way. That hadn't happened. Okay, so I mean, I just think you got to sit back, see what happens there. I mean, I would doubt that they would take that back up, or at least it would be very rare to do so. I guess it's a good example of sometimes it's just best to wait and be deliberate on things. And right, I guess the next day, immediately following that, and the people, we got to get this fixed and changed. And then as time goes on, you think, well, maybe it's not. Maybe that's the way it should be. Let's talk about this and debate it. So I think it's too early. I haven't heard of. I don't think it's got a lot of momentum right now either way, and let's see what happens with a definitive answer on if they're going to take this back up and see where it goes. I mean, I may be out of the loop on that some, but that's the way I view it.
That's right.
Thank you. What do you think the legislative intent was? I mean, the whole idea of the opinion was, well, they weren't sure the language was in there. What was the legislature's intent when it set the millages and stuff like that?
Well, the governor was in. He was in, right? I mean, he made it very clear that was the intent. It was for it to come. So I mean, that's I think you have to take him for. I mean, I think he's probably right.
You guys are the leaders now. So
well, but we were. But you talk about legislative intent. Now we weren't there, and you're reading plain language of statutes, right? And so that's what the court did. So but the governor was there, and he said that's what we meant, and yet I'm sure that's what they meant. But that's.
You think that was the right thing to mean in that statute?
I mean, I don't comment on that. I mean, I just here we are, and this is going to apply to how many school districts? I mean, it's not. We'll figure that out. I mean, whether it needs to be changed or not. I just, I wasn't a part of that debate. If it needs to be debated again, we'll debate it again. I mean, I don't know the answer to it.
Will it be a simple amendment fix to change the law like that?
Yeah, I think it's statute. I mean, I guess. I mean,
if
statutory.
if there's an agreed resolution to it. I mean, I've heard some members that think it's a horrible decision. I've heard other members that think it's a good decision. So I think we still have to figure out actually what it means and let that play out a little bit.
You think it's possible y'all may just not do anything with it? How likely does that look right now that you may just leave it as is?
I think that's always possible here, but I mean, it's just one of the things the Education Committee is going to process and work on, and we're going to take their lead on what needs to be done.
What about on the issue of school choice, with changes to that? What changes do you all favor, and do you like the issue with school funding? Is there any consensus that you're getting from either chamber?
I don't think there's any consensus yet. I know there's a lot of people working on it, and so we'll probably hear quite a bit about that. But I mean, I think we need something that's families can rely on. I have some situations in my district where students are allowed to transfer from school A to school B, but not from school B back to school A. I think kids tend to learn better when they're at a school where they want to be. I think we need something that is stable and not up in the air all the time, and just get it resolved. But I don't, legally the consequences are very serious, and so there's no short answer to that. But it'll be one of the things that the committee works on.
So what about your chamber?
Agree. I mean, I'm sure that we'll have some various proposals that will come from both chambers, and we'll just have to rely on the committee process and and debate it. But that's not. I've been, primarily, as I've said, recently and over the last few weeks, I'm primarily focused on Medicaid and the budget. So, we'll take those things as they come, as they work through the committee process.
Do y'all think we should relax, generally speaking, do you think we should relax our restrictions on the numbers of charter schools? Do you think we have opportunity to have charter schools without as much tight regulation by the state education board as we've seen?
Generally speaking, I'm personally a proponent of more charter schools.
Are we going to see legislation to that effect?
I'd be surprised if we did not.
Where do y'all stand on, Brian King has introduced legislation, both statute and amendment on voter ID. Where do y'all stand on that right now?
That's Senate bill. What do you?
It might reach your chamber.
He hasn't been sworn in until January 14th. Right now, he's Representative King. No, I'm just kidding. It's an issue that'll get a lot of attention. I haven't had the chance to read the bill or the proposed amendment, so I don't think I have anything to say at this time.
Do you think in general, do you think voters should be required to show photo identification at the polls in order to cast a ballot?
I don't think I've ever voted without doing it.
Do you think that should be a requirement?
I think we ought to know who's voting, but I don't, there's a difference with thinking that in general and then finding a legislative way to do something. So, in general, I think we need to be very careful about making sure that both people are allowed to vote in an easy way and that we know who's voting and there's no fraud. Is there a legislative way to do that? I'm not sure.
I'll always listen to the debate, but I think that the benefits of this is a balancing test, right? And so I think sitting here today, the benefits of having some sort of identification and outweigh the I'm trying to think of the right word. They outweigh the chilling effect, I guess, that may have. That's the right term. But again, I'd be willing to listen to both sides of the argument. But I'm like Senator. I always have some sort of ID handy. That's not an issue with me. And we all come into these things from just a personal life deal and our own perspective. So I'm certainly willing to listen to people with different perspectives. But sitting here today, I think that when you balance those out, that it's not an unreasonable requirement.
A lot of times, I'm sorry, go ahead, sir.
So,
Speaker, I was just going to ask, does it matter as far as whether or not the legislation is needed, whether they're able to come up with solid examples of people voting improperly, or is it more just kind of theoretical?
Well, I'm answering the question on a theoretical basis. I have not read his bill. I think he was just a simple, should we do it or not? And I would get. It's always the devil in the detail, right? We always need to, figure out procedurally, how it would be. And I haven't seen that. I don't know if it's just as simple as you got to have it. What is it? Anybody know? Just maybe read. Got to have state ID, driver's license, state ID. I don't know what's in the bill.
What I meant though is, it would seem like if there are cases where voter fraud have been established, that it would make the argument stronger for legislation than if it's fixing a problem that hasn't been established in the first place.
I think that's fair to say.
Is there any discussion about reforms on the absentee balloting process? It seems like that's where most of the fraud is really occurring.
I haven't heard that. I agree with that's where there's a lot of fraud, but I haven't heard it that specific.
A lot of House or Senate leaders, when they take the pro tem position or the Speaker's position, they don't carry a lot of legislation in the legislative session. Do you have plans to carry any bills in particular?
No.
I do not. We were wondering that as well.
It's Medicaid and budget, Medicaid and budget. I mean, that's where the focus is.
If we go back to y'all talk about using the surplus funds for Medicaid again, I know in just a few minutes we're probably going to be told that's one-time money, but what's y'all's response to it?
I've been here long enough that it's been called a bad idea when it was proposed by some people in the House in 2003, and a brilliant idea when it was proposed by other people later on. So we'll just do whatever the legislature is who has to create a budget. That's our constitutional obligation. The governor fulfilled his constitutional obligation by proposing one.
Well, is it a good or bad idea to use surplus that exists at the end of the fiscal year and plug it into an ongoing budget?
It's not a perfect idea. It's definitely a better idea than doing nothing. Making things work for 1 or 2 years is better than letting them fall apart with hundreds of millions of dollars sitting there available to prevent that harm.
And I agree.
But that's my position in 2003 all the way through today. I've never had a different position on that.
I agree. I mean, generally, I don't think anybody thinks the governor doesn't. I don't understand his position to be that's the best case scenario either. But sometimes, you can do what you got, do all you can do, and I think this is one of those occasions where you got to make that happen.
Speaking of him, he just walked
We were
in.
just talking about you, so that's ears are burning.
Mr. Chairman, move the previous question.
So, Senator Johnson talked about the Little Rock Zoo. You guys got any, when he talked about it years ago, do you guys have anything to say? Anything similar?
No.
What about the press room?
No
Gabe,
changes
what about
there.
the press room? Don't answer that. I don't know. Yeah.
Does anybody have anything else?
Since the governor stepped in here, let me ask: with a Republican-controlled legislature, the governor, does he have the same influence and the same pull that he's had in past sessions?
Andrew, why in the world would you ask a question like that? Now he's in the room, and so you answer a question. You don't infer that I'm answering it because he's standing there. But look, the governor's somebody that I personally respect, and think we all do, and he has over many years exhibited great leadership, and has been a model of public service, and I will always listen and respect what he has to say. We may not always agree, but that's I haven't found him to make comments just to be making them. So I highly respect his opinion, and that's not going to change from last session or this session. So that's the way I feel about it.
Good answer.